In this video, you're going to learn how you can let go of perfectionism as an athlete. Hey there, I'm Eli Straw, mental performance coach and the founder of SuccessStartsWithin.com. Now, letting go of perfectionism involves three parts. The first part happens before practice or a game. The second part happens during practice or a game. And the third part happens after practice or a game. Now, it's important to break the strategy up into these three different parts since perfectionism is going to impact you on three different levels. Demanding perfection from yourself will lead to you playing more timidly going into games, since you don't want to make any mistakes. The same can be true for practice, especially if you're fighting for a starting position right now and you feel like you need to play perfectly in order for you to win that starting role. And then during a game, if you make a mistake, it will be tough to move on quickly if your mind is focused on perfection. And then after games, if you beat yourself up and are overly critical of the mistakes that you made in the way that you performed, this is going to limit your confidence moving forward, and it's honestly going to limit the growth that you can make moving forward. So the strategy is going to be broken up into three different parts, each one focused on reducing the impact of one of the three levels of perfectionism. So we're going to start with number one, altering your focus going into practices or going into games. If you demand perfection from yourself, how do you know if you hit your target? In other words, how do you know if you were perfect that day? You may say making no mistakes or playing really well. Not only are those vague ideas, but they are also focused on the outcome. To know if you were perfect, you need to have already played and be looking back on your performance, right? That's the only way of knowing if you were perfect. Now, going into a game, do you think it's best for you to be thinking about something that involves your performance being over? Probably not. That kind of focus isn't allowing you to give as much attention to what you're doing, not to mention the anxiety that is caused by thinking too much about the outcome. With perfectionism, you are thinking about the outcome since that is the only way to determine whether or not you played perfectly. But instead of focusing on the outcome and having your expectations for how you played be based on them, you want to turn your attention more onto the process. Now, the process of your game is going to involve all the small pieces that lead to the outcome. The truth is, the result of a play or a game will happen whether you think about them, care about them, worry about them, or not. The outcome is always going to happen, even if it may not be the outcome that you want. Knowing that the outcome is always going to happen, there's really no reason for you to worry about it. Instead, you simply need to let it be. Now, I know this is incredibly difficult to do, especially if you're afraid of making mistakes or you feel like you need to play perfectly in practice in order to start next game. But I'm not saying that you still can't want an outcome. You just don't need to focus on it anymore. So I want you to ask yourself this question. If I want to play perfectly, what are all the steps that are involved in me doing so? If you're going on a trip, and if it was a really fun trip, one where you couldn't wait to get to where you're going, would you worry about how you were going to get there? Or would you just turn on your GPS and focus on all the small, different roads and different turns that you need to make in order to get there? With your game, you are your own GPS. You need to outline the road that will take you to your destination. No matter how badly you want to get to where you're going, if you take a bunch of wrong turns and you aren't focused on the right turns, you're going to have a really tough time getting there. Focusing more on the process will help take your attention off the outcome and your need to be perfect. Instead of having a vague idea of what it means to play perfectly, you will have a clear target of what you need to focus on that day. Now, if you stick to your targets and you focus on the process, then it was a good day. And the reason that you can feel confident in describing your performances as good if you stuck to the process is because we know that over the long term, if you give more attention to the process, it gives you a better chance of getting the outcome that you want. To make it easier on yourself to focus on the process, you can set performance objectives going into practices and games. These are targets you set for yourself that are part of the process and 100% within your control. Now, I've linked a video right here that goes into more detail on setting performance objectives for practices and games if you want to go ahead and watch that. Now, the next part of this strategy is about managing mistakes. Because along with turning your attention onto the process with the use of performance objectives, you also want to shift the way that you see mistakes. As a perfectionist athlete, mistakes mean you weren't good enough. Therefore, they become something to fear. You need to play perfectly, and mistakes mean that you were not perfect. This is where you find yourself playing more stiff and timidly during games due to this fear. Whether you're a perfectionist or not, playing timidly and with fear will do nothing but hold you back. To play your best, there needs to be a level of fearlessness present, at least when it comes to making mistakes. You need to open yourself up to the possibility of messing up in order to allow yourself the chance to succeed. Something that will only happen once you've accepted mistakes. But how can you accept mistakes right now if they're an indicator that you aren't good enough? Well, it's going to begin with practice. During practice and training, mistakes, while still not something that you may want to have happen, are not as impactful. Since it's just practice, we know that mistakes are just a little bit easier to move on from and aren't as frustrating. This makes practice the perfect time to begin conditioning yourself to view mistakes differently. Instead of thinking about how to avoid mistakes and how much you can't mess up, work on telling yourself that you accept mistakes and then shift your attention onto improving. An improving mindset accepts mistakes as opportunities to learn. When you shift to this way of thinking, you no longer fear messing up, but accept it as a necessary part of growing as a player. Once you get comfortable with this new way of looking at mistakes in practice, it's time to apply it to games. You want to work on reminding yourself going into the game that you accept mistakes. You know that they may happen, and you accept that they're a natural part of the game and nothing for you to fear. Another important part of accepting mistakes is changing the way that you respond to mistakes in the moment and after games. And this is where we need to talk about evaluating instead of judging your game. And that's the third part of this strategy. A key characteristic of a perfectionist athlete is always looking for the little things that they did wrong. It seems odd, since perfectionists want to be perfect. But the truth is, perfectionism leaves you feeling like you were never perfect, which means you are always nitpicking your game and looking for mistakes, no matter how big or small they may be. Thinking in this way is going to drastically reduce your confidence over time, since you are not allowing yourself to build the memory of success that is needed to increase the trust in your game. Instead, you may find that you repetitively see yourself as not good enough and having fallen short of perfection. In addition, it reinforces the fear surrounding mistakes, since you are likely getting down on yourself after games because of the mistakes that you point out. Knowing the tendency for you as a perfectionist to first look at what you did wrong, it's important to give yourself the opportunity each day to find some things that are good about your game. And this is where a good evaluation system comes into play. Instead of judging yourself, you will be evaluating yourself and your game with two goals in mind: increase confidence and to improve. Now, neither one of those goals involve beating yourself up. The evaluation system that I suggest you begin with is a very, very simple one, made up of two different questions. What did I do well today? And what can I learn and use to improve? Now, it's very important that you ask yourself and answer these questions in that specific order. Since we know it's easier to point out everything that you did wrong, you need to give yourself the opportunity first to look at what you did well. Then you can look at mistakes, right? After you've decided what you've done well, then you can look at your mistakes, but not in the same way that you've been looking at them up to this point. Now, instead of judging yourself, you are simply looking for what you can learn and taking what you can learn to improve your game moving forward. The more you see yourself play well, the more confidence you're going to have to play well again in the future. By first thinking about what you did well, you are giving yourself the opportunity each and every day to feel successful. In addition to building belief and trust, when you first look at what you did well, you are in a much better mindset then to examine your mistakes objectively. Now, in addition to this strategy to manage perfectionism and let go of perfectionism, a whole different idea is learning how to change this fear that you have surrounding mistakes. And so I've made a 4-part series that goes into detail on overcoming the fear of failure and specifically the fear of making mistakes in games. So go ahead and click right here to watch the series on overcoming the fear of failure in sports. If you have any questions about this video or any other sports psychology or mental training topic, please leave them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I put out new videos each day on sports psychology and mental training.